It begins on a ruined battlefield buried under snow and death, where years of war have left nothing but broken weapons, corpses, and silence. Archimonde coughs out a frightening amount of blood, his chest torn open by a fatal wound. He barely remains standing, using his weapon as a crutch while every breath comes out ragged and heavy. The holy sword of the Order has pierced his heart, and the knights around him erupt in triumph, shouting that they have finally brought down their target. The soldiers call him the Devil of the Continent. The infamous necromancer Archimonde, now riddled with arrows and drenched in his own blood, understands that his end has finally arrived. With no escape left, he accepts that he will die there in the snow. This battle marks the final turning point of the great 10-year Continental War. An elite squad had somehow infiltrated his forces. Archimonde had predicted such a possibility and prepared a defensive line, yet even that failed miserably. In the end, he can only admit that he has been completely defeated in this historic battle, and all that happened because of one knight. Burkle Ryland, commander of the northern troops, walks toward him through the ruined field. He says that this victory was not something he achieved through his own strength alone. Many people shed their blood to bring him this far, and countless soldiers held the front line with heroic resolve. Because of that, Burkle tells Archimonde to surrender at once, saying that the continent has waited too long for peace. Archimonde's face twists with fury. He snaps at the knight to shut his mouth. With rage burning in his eyes, he asks where all of them were when people were dying from the plague. He accuses the Order of being worse than beasts for speaking of peace only now, after everything has already been lost. To him, the knights are nothing more than disgusting hypocrites. Having no patience for Burkle's noble speech, Archimonde glares at him with pure hatred. A sinister green aura erupts from his broken body as he declares that he will wipe out every human with his own hands. The soldiers recoil in horror. Even in such a critical state, the necromancer is still able to summon an absurd amount of magic. Burkle quickly raises his shield, warning everyone that the situation has become dangerous and ordering Archimonde to stop. The war itself began with a plague that killed 20 million people, whose corpses were later turned into a dark army. Spitting more blood, Archimonde mocks Burkle's moral lecture and asks if they truly think he is stupid. Among the dead were many people the knights had known personally, proving to him that this attack is nothing more than revenge disguised as justice. Staring straight at Burkle, he asks if he is wrong about their petty motivation. Burkle grips his sword firmly and says that he came there for one reason only. He says that every battle he has fought was for the future of the children. For the first time, Archimonde is left genuinely confused by the answer. Burkle continues, explaining that he must leave his choices, beliefs, and hopes to the next generation. As Archimonde looks at him, he sees only a corrupted reflection of himself in the blade. Yet in Burkle's eyes, what he sees is different, the towering image of a truly righteous knight. A radiant light descends from the dark sky and shines across the battlefield. Wrapped in that divine glow, Burkle repeats that he is doing this for the sake of his descendants. Archimonde's body can no longer endure. With his strength gone, he collapses to his knees in the snow. Accepting his fate, he tells Burkle to deliver the final blow. The nearby soldiers panic when Burkle discards the holy sword, begging their commander not to throw away such a sacred weapon at the final moment. Ignoring them, Burkle draws a dark sword engraved with runes, prepared to finish the grim task himself. He points the blade at Archimonde's neck and asks if he has any last words. Bleeding heavily, Archimonde smiles and warns him that necromancers do not die so easily. He promises that one day he will return. Before he can say more, Burkle swings. With one swift, brutal strike, he decapitates Archimonde without hesitation. Dark blood sprays across the snow from the force of the blow. The soldiers raise their weapons and cheer together, celebrating the final death of the continent's greatest villain. Lying on the ground, Archimonde's severed head still hears the army's victory cries as his consciousness slowly fades. The battlefield remains filled with cheers of relief, as if the nightmare that haunted the continent has finally ended. That moment becomes known as the final milestone of the great 10-year war against the worst threat the world had ever faced. And so, the feared necromancer Archimonde officially falls, marking the beginning of a new era. Far away from that battlefield, heavy rain pours endlessly from the night sky. Lightning tears through the darkness, briefly revealing the massive mansion of a noble family in the middle of the storm. Inside a brightly lit room, two maids freeze in shock when they see the newborn baby's lips moving. One of them slowly approaches to look closer, then lets out a startled cry. Inside that fragile infant body, Archimonde's soul awakens, confused and trying to understand where he is. The servant excitedly lifts a mirror and shows him the Duchess, explaining that she is his mother. Young Master Clane feels his tiny muscles weighed down and useless, while the Duchess smiles warmly and asks him to call out to her. The baby struggles with all his strength, trying to push the first syllables from his throat. The maids clasp their hands together in amazement, impressed that the newborn seems to be trying to speak so early. Then the baby's eyes suddenly widen. He screams out, attempting to summon his dark guardians while declaring that he is Archimonde. With the commanding presence of a tyrant, he demands immediate obedience. The servants drop their belongings in panic. At the same moment, blue lightning splits the sky above the estate, as if the storm itself is answering the furious awakening of the reincarnated villain. The storm continues to rage over the mansion plaza, lightning flashing over the grand fountain. 15 years pass since that strange day. On a sunny day in the city, several girls sigh in admiration when a certain young man passes by. They are completely captivated by his handsome face and flawless silver hair. Young Master Klain has grown beautifully, to the point that people consider him a divine masterpiece. Despite the praise surrounding him, Klain walks with a bored and serious expression, clearly tired of the attention. The maids nearby continue whispering about how elegant, wonderful, and stylish he looks in his daily life. Then Klain suddenly turns his head, sensing suspicious movement nearby. Without warning, a bucket of water is thrown straight at his head. The attacker celebrates that he has finally found him. It is Garrison Bjerkman, a priest who loudly commands the evil spirit to vanish. The old man frowns in frustration, saying that he is certain he saw the exact same expression as the Dark Lord on Klain's face. The maids scream and flee down the hallway while Garrison proudly claims that the purification was carried out just in time. With the basin still stuck over his head, Klain shakes off the water and asks whether the old man ever gets tired of that useless ritual. Garrison refuses to back down, insisting that the necromancer's evil soul still lies dormant inside the young master. He splashes more holy water across Klain's irritated face, loudly insisting that Klain had just made the villain's expression. Klain stares at him in disbelief and asks if the old man has completely lost his mind. Then, without wasting another second, he runs away as fast as he can, cursing the priest repeatedly. Garrison immediately points after him and orders the guards to capture the runaway at once. The fanatic warns that the crime of disrespect will be punished with a naked holy bath, while Klain screams his own name in protest. Trapped in that ridiculous memory, Klain reflects that he truly never expected his second life to turn out this way. He had his head cut off and awakened inside a baby's body, but because he recited dark spells too early, he ended up being locked in a monastery. As a child, he spent his days huddled in the darkness, suffering through pure trauma and isolation inside that enclosed place. The imposing figure of Priest Garrison became his greatest nightmare, always looming over him with a book in hand. Garrison used to coldly ask whether the one before him was the necromancer or the noble child. His punishments included forcing Klain to listen to prayer chants for 24 hours without pause. He was also made to take freezing baths filled with holy water and floating garlic. Even worse, he was forced through absurd rituals, tied to a cross and surrounded by purifying flames. His cries for help echoed through the monastery chapel, but no one ever came to save him. 5 years after enduring all that suffering, Klain lies on the floor of his bedroom wearing a party hat. His personal maid, Erin, clasps her hands and prays that he grows up as a healthy descendant of heroes. Hearing her exaggerated prayer, Klain wears an expression of complete mental exhaustion. Unable to bear it any longer, he tears the hat off his head and throws it onto the floor with force, startling her. Erin begins to whimper, saying that she made the accessory with her own hands. Realizing he has gone too far, Klain bends down to pick it up and apologizes for acting rudely. Then Erin finishes her sentence, explaining that Priest Garrison had sewn it himself. Klain instantly freezes, holding the crumpled hat with deep disgust on his face. At that exact moment, Garrison appears in the doorway and calls for the young master. Wiping away a tear, the old priest becomes emotional, saying that he is touched. Klain kept the gift he spent an entire week knitting. Trembling with rage, Klain crushes the fabric in his hands and declares that he will never wear it under any circumstances. Garrison immediately screams that the evil soul has awakened, while Klain screams back that he only wants to be left in peace. Just then, the Knight Commander bows slightly and asks whether the ritual has finished. With a nervous smile, he comments that the rumors about Klain's possession have already lasted for more than 10 years. Klain grabs Garrison's cheeks and pulls them in frustration, grumbling that even the church has officially confirmed he has no abnormalities. Ignoring his protest, Garrison simply shoves him to the ground and greets the commander with cheerful politeness. The two men speak pleasantly as if nothing strange has happened, while Klain, still on the floor, realizes once again how skillfully the fanatic pretends to be normal around other people. Garrison turns away and says that he is leaving, proving that he knows exactly how to behave in society when necessary. But before stepping through the doorway, he casts one sharp, sideways glance at Klain. The tension in the hallway only grows heavier as Garrison justifies his behavior, saying that there is always a chance something dangerous might twist inside Klain. After leaving that dark warning behind, the priest pauses for a moment as if remembering something important. Then, with shameless cheer, he forms a heart above his head with his arms and reminds Klain about the next ritual. Klain immediately tells him to disappear. Even so, he quickly waves him away, not out of kindness, but because he wants the unwanted visitor gone as soon as possible. Once Garrison finally leaves and only the servants remain, Klain grabs his own hair in frustration. Slumping into an armchair, he questions how an official healer can be allowed to torture people in such a barbaric way. Erin agrees that the old man looks like a muscular demon, but with complete innocence she asks if her master truly is not the villain. Holding a towel, Klain laughs stiffly and lies, saying that he is not because he can no longer stand hearing that cursed name. As he dries his face, he thinks that if he ever admits the truth, the punishments will only become even worse. Behind him, the shadow of his former self seems to loom like a ghost from the past. Klain thinks back on the 7 years he spent imprisoned, watched, and treated like a walking disaster. He complains about the endless persecution, yet he also understands that Garrison's position gives him frightening authority. Curious, Erin steps closer and asks what the title of Exarch actually means. Seeing her confusion, Commander Dunkel explains that it is a title granted only to the strongest person in the entire church. Far down the hallway, Garrison's imposing presence alone makes that explanation feel believable. Dunkel adds that only the leader of the duchy could ever truly deal with someone like him. Aaron is impressed and praises the noble family's strength. Klain agrees with a tone that makes it sound obvious. While gently stroking his hair, Aaron asks who the strongest duke in the family's lineage was. Klain rests his cheek against his hand and thinks for a moment before declaring that the first head of the family was the strongest. Dunkel tries to argue that the current patriarch also deserves consideration, but Klain cuts him off immediately. With a serious expression, he insists with total certainty that the founder's supremacy is absolute. Unable to argue against that sudden conviction, Dunkel simply falls silent and watches him. Aaron brightens and says that she understands now, commenting that she always knew the young master preferred the original founder. She mentions that Klain is always staring at his portrait. Klain thinks to himself that what he feels is very far from admiration. Dunkel smiles faintly and remarks that time truly passes quickly as he thinks about the founding of the house. Klain quietly fixes his gaze on the small painting hanging on the wall, feeling the weight of 200 years pressing down on him. Even now, he admits to himself that this ridiculous reality is still difficult to accept. The illustrious family line stretches from the first generation all the way to the current 7th Duke. At the very top of that golden lineage hangs the familiar face of the great warrior from the past. The first Duke, the legendary knight, Burkle Ryland. Klain, once the feared necromancer Archimonde, bitterly accepts the cruel irony that he has been reborn as a descendant of the very man who killed him. In his nightmares, he relives that final moment again and again. He remembers spitting Burkle's name with hatred. He remembers the hero's cold, unwavering answer before the fatal strike. The knight had declared that everything he did was for the future of the children. Then the blade fell. Archimonde's severed head rolled across the snow-covered battlefield once more. Klain jolts awake in the middle of the night, his heart hammering from the brutal memory. Sitting upright in his luxurious bed, he takes deep breaths, trying to steady the panic still gripping his body. He wipes the sweat from his face, curses the nightmare, and reminds himself of who he really is. Yet he also admits that his period of blind fury, the rage that nearly wiped the world off the map, belongs to the past. Back then, he was beheaded in the frozen snow, only to open his eyes 200 years in the future. As he gets out of bed, he grumbles that he still cannot get used to this light-colored hair. Suddenly, Garrison's deep voice warns that Klain was saying quite a lot of suspicious nonsense in his sleep. With a cynical smile, the priest asks if he was dreaming about the villain's life, revealing once again his insane obsession. To protect his secret, Klain quickly pushes Aaron forward and pretends that he has simply been exhausted these past few days. But Aaron clenches her fists, furious, and says that she heard everything. She insists that the young master was talking in his sleep and even remembered a dream where he ordered everyone to be killed. Klain tells her to shut up and demands to know when he ever said anything like that. At that moment, the butler Berkman enters and mentions the sword demonstration, thanking the maid for her report. Klain immediately imagines Garrison's terrifying face, and as expected, the butler announces that the young master will receive double purification sessions. Panicking, Klain quickly covers Aaron's mouth before she can say anything else. Inwardly, he curses that lunatic priest and demands that he stop tormenting him. Soon after, as they walk through the corridors, Klain becomes confused and asks what this sword demonstration is about. Walking slightly ahead, Berkman confirms that the Duke has ordered the young master to attend this time. Aaron walks happily beside Klain while eating a sweet, while Klain still struggles to understand why his father suddenly wants him there. Berkman glances back while chewing something of his own and asks if the servant is bothering him, but Klain tells him not to worry. Watching Aaron enjoy her snack with pure happiness, he simply notices how much fun she seems to be having. As they enter the large, luxurious hall, Klain finds it strange that the Duke has never summoned him for this kind of event before. Berkman calmly explains that members of the Branch family have come to visit. Klain lowers his head slightly as he processes this information. Distant relatives, troublesome people. Sure enough, several nobles with mocking expressions stare at him from across the hall. Klain immediately understands that a very annoying group has arrived. On one side of the hall, a noble laughs and tells the others that they should call the boy Lord Archimonde instead of Klain. Others mock the years he spent locked away in the monastery. Klain recognizes them as cousins from his father's side. He spots some chubby boys devouring meat and guesses they are from the northern branch. Elsewhere, a group of silhouettes speaks among themselves, reminding him of the relatives from the west. Among them, an arrogant blonde girl relaxes comfortably in one of the hall's armchairs. One noble assumes Klain cannot hear the insults, while Klain tries to recall exactly who they are. They keep whispering behind his back, calling him the trash of the Ryland family. Annoyed by their boldness, Klain throws a chilling glance over his shoulder and silently mocks the idea of family unity. Then he turns away and decides their names are not worth remembering. He knows these relatives bark so loudly only because the duchy itself is weakening. The fact that they openly disrespect a direct heir of the main bloodline already says enough about the current state of the house. At the center of the hall, two swordsmen exchange rapid blows in the long-awaited combat demonstration. After taking a hit, the purple-haired boy staggers back in anger and shouts his opponent's name with frustration. He demands that his opponent stop underestimating him and fight seriously for once during practice. The other boy blocks the incoming strikes with almost no effort. The attacker insists that he is not finished yet, but his confidence is clearly fading. The blonde smiles calmly and asks if that is truly the case, despite being treated as the family's only remaining hope. With an elegant posture, Dellen mocks the situation. He is Klain's prodigy half-brother. Watching from afar, Klain reflects that the family's reputation as swordsmen survives almost entirely because of that blonde genius. Driven by frustration, the purple-haired boy charges with all his strength, swearing that things will be different this time. Klain's eyes glow faintly with a purple light as he focuses on the fight. Since this is the first time he has properly seen swordsmanship since his reincarnation, he studies every movement carefully. With precise steps, Dellen glides across the floor and dodges the opponent's brute force charge. In the blink of an eye, the prodigy adjusts his stance, preparing his body for a lightning-fast counterattack. Wrapped in yellowish energy, Dellen leaps high into the air, catching the other swordsman completely off guard. Klain narrows his eyes. He realizes that he can see everything clearly. His mind processes the footwork, the shift of balance, and even the exact instant Dellen draws momentum from the ground. The purple-haired boy's eyes widen as Dellen's blade comes down without warning. Even the flow of mana becomes visible to Klain. He recognizes the move as the secret art of the Ryland family. With a brutal strike, Dellen unleashes the meteor sword technique and slams his opponent directly into the ground. The impact ends the duel at once, leaving the defeated youth sprawled in the center of the magic symbol. Looking down at him, Dellen reminds him that he had already warned who was truly in trouble in that match. The nobles burst into admiration, praising the advanced technique and marveling that Dellen can perform such a skill in public. Klain scratches his cheek, understanding that the demonstration was meant to warn the branch families of the main house's power. Still, he remains confused by what had flashed before his eyes during the fight. Then an excited voice calls his name from the middle of the brightly lit hall. Dellen approaches with a smile and asks when Klain arrived. Klain answers that he only just got there. Still smiling, Dellen says he would have tried much harder if he had known his younger brother was watching. Klain stares at the blonde and silently acknowledges how irritatingly perfect he is at everything. At the same time, he continues wondering about the true reason behind the branch family's visit. He suspects the relatives have come to squeeze money out of the duchy again. Then a deep voice praises Dellen's excellent performance. Walking forward with noble dignity, Patriarch Heinkel congratulates his son for mastering the family's secret technique. Dellen bows respectfully. Klain quietly studies the man who now leads the family he has been reborn into. With clear pride, Heinkel acknowledges the hard work Dellen has put in recently. Watching the two of them, Klain concludes that this genius swordsman must be the Duke's last remaining source of pride. Beside them, Commander Dunkel praises Dellen's precision, calling his natural talent overwhelming. Slightly embarrassed by the attention, Dellen smiles humbly and says that he still has much to improve. Heinkel then recalls the final words of the great founder, saying that the knights of their house must always be the greatest in the empire. He places a hand on Dellen's shoulder and tells him to carve those words into his heart and continue moving forward with resolve. Right after that, the Patriarch shifts his gaze and calmly calls for his youngest son. Surprised by the sudden attention, Klain remains silent and waits. Heinkel slowly extends his hand toward Klain's head. Then, with unexpected gentleness, he strokes his hair and says with sadness that he cannot feel any mana in him. Klain lowers his head and apologizes. Inside, he bitterly accepts that he is treated as dead weight, someone with no expectations placed on his future. Dunkel steps forward and takes the blame, apologizing as he remembers that Klain lost his most important years of training while locked in the monastery. The distant relatives immediately begin whispering again, shocked that the second son has no magic, unlike his prodigy brother. They conclude that the main line has become useless, giving the branch families a chance to seize control. Klain walks away from the scene, telling himself that he does not care about their insults. But then Burkel's words return sharply to his mind. The hero had said he fought for the future of the children. Rage rises inside Klain. He clenches his fist tightly as laughter continues behind him. Revolted, he wonders how the founder could have risked his life for trash like this. To him, the house has already reached its end. Before he leaves the hall completely, Dellen kindly calls after him with a farewell. Out in the hallway, the loser of the duel suddenly blocks Klain's path. With a bitter smile, he mocks him as an heir who cannot even use a sword. He calls Klain an embarrassment to the family, saying that he acts like royalty despite being useless. Klain does not lose his composure. He stares at the mediocre relative and asks if secretly chasing women is something worth being proud of. The noble becomes irritated and asks if Klain thought money would be enough to stop the rumors about him, calling him a foolish scoundrel. At that moment, heavy footsteps echo through the corridor, followed by a stern voice questioning where that nonsense came from, and falls onto the floor with his legs in the air. The man then shouts that this trash does not even know who his own mother is. Klain goes completely silent. Hearing those words, he casts a dark look over his shoulder and asks in a threatening tone what the man just said. The arrogant relative immediately breaks into a cold sweat. Faced with that oppressive aura, he feels genuine fear toward the young master. Klain knows his anger is not truly because of a mother he barely knows. What disgusts him is the branch family's bloated superiority complex. Looking at that pathetic disgrace, the necromancer wonders how such a grand family fell to such a low level. Remembering the final blow he suffered in the war, he questions how the lineage of the hero who killed him could have become this pitiful joke. After the brief outburst, Dunkel drops the defeated swordsman to the floor and declares that their playtime has gone too far. Standing firm, he warns that he will no longer tolerate any disrespect toward the main heir. Humiliated and cornered, the defeated swordsman can only click his tongue in anger and accept the scolding. As the useless relative leaves, Dunkel tells him to consider himself lucky for surviving only because someone intervened. Then the commander suddenly stiffens when he notices Klain reaching toward his sword scabbard. Klain watches the blade shine with intense focus, as if something inside him has already decided what to do. He catches Dunkel's attention and casually asks if he has any spare swords he could lend him. Later that night, silence settles over the vast noble estate. In the dark training field, Dunkel hands a sword to Klain, unable to hide his curiosity about why the young master requested it. Standing alone beneath the night sky, Klain murmurs to himself while testing the weight of the weapon in his hands. He moves the blade carefully, trying to recall how Delin performed the meteor sword technique. Then he asks Dunkel about it. Taking a combat stance, Klain warns that he needs to confirm something and tells the commander to come at him first. Watching from a short distance away, Dunkel becomes thoughtful. He concludes that the youngest son has not given up on the path of the sword after all, but the thought fills him with regret because it is already too late. Without magic, Klain can never become an official knight. Dunkel also believes that the meteor sword is a secret technique created by the Duke himself, meaning it should be impossible for someone to imitate it after seeing only the stance. Klain closes his eyes and concentrates. The duel from earlier remains absurdly clear in his mind. He can relive every detail with perfect accuracy. Delin's posture, the shift in his feet, the way his body drew force from the ground, and the path his blade carved through the air. The more Klain analyzes it, the more his perception sharpens. His body understands not only the movement but even the precise flow of mana behind the skill. When he opens his eyes again, a purple magical glow radiates from his pupils in the darkness. Dunkel suddenly feels the air grow heavy behind him. The knight turns around in alarm, startled by the abrupt shift in the atmosphere. An overwhelming force presses down on him, and he immediately recognizes the scale of that mysterious power. His eyes widen in disbelief, unable to accept what he is witnessing on the training field. Then Klain moves. In one explosive motion, he perfectly reproduces the family's secret technique and releases a colossal purple slash. The dark mana of the former Dark Lord surges through his sharpened vision as the attack tears forward. Klain stands calmly in place while a massive aura pours from his body with almost no effort. The destructive strike crashes into the scenery, shattering the surrounding rocks beneath Dunkel's stunned gaze. Smoke spreads across the training ground, and the commander can only stammer the young master's title, unable to understand how someone supposedly useless could perform such a miracle. Klain smiles confidently at the result, secretly shocked that his own cheap imitation worked far better than expected. Later that day, little Aaron stands nearby with a blank, confused expression, unable to understand what is happening in the room. Priest Garrison, meanwhile, is sweating nervously while carrying out yet another punitive purification. Staring into the bubbling bucket, the old priest refuses to believe how long Klain has endured underwater. Then he celebrates like a madman, saying that the young master held his breath for more than a minute. Klain finally yanks his head out of the water, gasping desperately for air. Furious, he asks if that lunatic plans to hold the next ritual inside an aquarium. As Klain complains about the extra torture, Garrison laughs and claims that he sensed a deeply sinister energy coming from him. Klain indignantly asks whether he must suffer abuse every time the priest has a bad feeling. At that moment, Dunkel enters the hall with a mysterious letter in hand and calls for the young master with a serious look. Drying his wet hair, Klain asks who sent the message. Dunkel explains that it came from the cousin Klain humiliated the day before. Klain immediately raises an eyebrow, suspicious of the sudden change in attitude from that coward. He examines the paper carefully, trying to uncover the true intention behind the words. The message is an invitation to a hunting competition, which sounds completely out of character for that disgusting relative. After thinking it over, Klain concludes that Dalton only needs a cheap excuse to lure him out of the mansion. Dunkel asks if he intends to go. Klain calmly says that he sees no reason to refuse. With a dark sidelong glance, the former necromancer thinks that this situation might actually benefit him. After all, he now has a powerful hidden card that can protect him even if he is alone. Over the past several hours, he has replayed the meteor sword technique in his mind thousands of times, carving every detail into memory. Through that intense mental training, Klain has reached an astonishing conclusion. He can perfectly copy any skill after seeing it only once. Understanding that the young master wants to test his new ability, Dunkel remains quiet for a moment, weighing the danger. Then, without pressing further, he agrees to the plan and says he will prepare the carriage for the hunting trip. Out of nowhere, Garrison appears and announces that he will also join them, making Klain furious at the relentless stalking. With a cynical expression, the priest asks if he had not already made his warning clear earlier that morning. Garrison stares at the boy with a heavy gaze, using the same excuse as always. He sensed suspicious energy. During the carriage ride toward the west, the priest repeats that claim again and again. However, the bumpy dirt road shakes the carriage so violently. Sighing in annoyance, Klain says that this is exactly why he tried to stop him from coming. Then he offers him a cushion and explains that the western forest terrain is rough, making it terrible for first-time travelers. Handing over the cushion, Klain says the nausea should pass if Garrison closes his eyes and rests for a while. Garrison nearly cries with emotion, believing that the boy has finally grown up. Klain immediately ruins the moment by telling him to pass the cushion to Aaron. Once the chaos inside the carriage finally calms down, Klain rests his cheek against his hand and watches the scenery through the small side window. The peaceful landscape outside makes him reflect on how drastically the entire region has changed. In his bloody memories from the past, this field was buried under dense snow and covered only in corpses. Now, that same frozen land has prospered into a vibrant and living place. As his thoughts drift, the former Dark Lord admits that all of this became possible because of Burkle's sacrifice. The carriage eventually stops, and Dunkel opens the door, informing young Master Klain that they have arrived at their destination. Klain steps out and sees the enormous, luxurious estate of the Cornwell family before him. Realizing the trip is over, he questions whether this is truly where that coward Dalton lives. He notices that the Branch family's mansion is even more extravagant than the main estate, proving they have plenty of money to waste. To him, it is absurd to spend so many resources just to host a simple hunting competition for children. Then a familiar voice calls his name, cutting off his thoughts. Dalton approaches while holding two fierce hunting dogs, wearing a cynical smile as he asks what Klain is staring at so intently. He brags about the well-built estate and shamelessly admits that it was constructed with money squeezed from the main family. With a mocking tone, Dalton assumes that someone who grew up trapped in a monastery would not understand how the real world works. Klain ignores the provocation and notices how thin the hunting dogs are. Instead of responding, he asks when the event turned into a casual chat. Dalton laughs at his impatience and says he expected Klain to rush things, so he came fully prepared. Without wasting time, he snaps his fingers and tells Klain to pay close attention. At the signal, the dogs bolt furiously toward the forest, officially starting the competition. Dalton calmly explains that he scattered bloody bait throughout the central mountain region to attract animals. He adds that a starving dog's sense of smell is tens of thousands of times stronger than that of a normal human. Lifting his crossbow, he says that once the beasts rush toward the scent of meat, he shoots them at the exact moment they run. Immediately, a well-aimed arrow pierces one of the dogs racing through the dense forest. The brutal impact makes the other beasts howl in pain as they too are targeted without mercy. Watching the slaughter, Dalton bursts into laughter and proudly celebrates the success of his cowardly hunting method in front of his guests. Startled by the pointless cruelty, Erin calls out for her master, drawing Dalton's attention. The sadistic host approaches her and strokes her head, recognizing her as the maid who always stays glued to Klain's side. With a malicious smile, he belittles her and tells her to follow him, promising to give her a very different kind of service. At that exact moment, Klain grabs Dalton's wrist tightly, stopping him from touching her any further. Dalton freezes in surprise. Klain coldly orders him to take his hands off his maid. With a deadly glare, the former necromancer threatens to break his arm if he does not release her immediately. Startled, Dalton quickly pulls his arm back and lets out a nervous laugh filled with irritation. As he walks toward his horse, he grumbles that the youngest son acts arrogant and overbearing despite his position. Refusing to waste more time arguing, Dalton mounts his steed and prepares to leave. From the saddle, he calls for Klain to follow him into the forest, mockingly warning that it is dangerous to walk alone. Klain mounts his own horse and orders Dunkel to remain behind and protect Aaron until he returns from the suspicious ride. Worried for the heir's safety, Klain longs and shows him a magic scroll. The item is a disposable artifact that can send an immediate emergency signal the moment it is torn. Klain understands that if his personal bodyguard followed him into the forest and suddenly vanished, it would look suspicious. Showing the magic crest on his right hand, he tells Dunkel to tear the scroll without hesitation if anything goes wrong. Trusting the knight's loyalty, Klain gallops into the trees, leaving Dunkel and Aaron behind at the mansion. In the courtyard, Priest Garrison watches him leave with an unusually serious and silent expression. Time passes quickly. Soon, the orange sky fades into a dark, starry night above the mountainous forest. Riding along the narrow trail, Klain calculates that his target should not be far ahead and continues following the visible tracks. Then he suddenly pulls the reins, surprised when Dalton's voice echoes through the darkness and confirms that he has arrived. Dalton sits casually on the body of a slain animal, holding his sword while asking why Klain took so long. Klain dismounts calmly and stares at the deranged relative, asking what grand plan he has prepared this time. In one swift motion, he draws his own blade, ready for any ambush lurking in the shadows. Ahead of him, several lifeless lie scattered across the ground, showing the trail of destruction Dalton has left behind. Without the slightest remorse, Dalton says that this gruesome scene is the grand final event of the day's competition. His eyes widen with madness as he points his weapon at Klain and declares that Klain will be his ultimate prey. Klain repeats the threat in disbelief. Dalton swears that he will cut off Klain's head and throw it at Dellen's feet. Faced with such stupidity, Klain laments the pathetic state of his current family. To him, they have become nothing but an empty shell with no real strength left. Then several armed men emerge from the forest shadows. Dalton confidently says that Klain will not even have a chance to react to the siege. The thugs grin sinisterly around him, while the ambush leader declares with certainty that the duchy already belongs to them in reality. Several archers crouched on the rocks around the clearing, their bows aimed straight at the lone boy below. One of them told Klain to curse his useless blood before he died. Klain slowly turned his face, studying every part of the trap surrounding him. Then, with a cold calmness, he agreed that the bloodline had indeed become useless. The killer grinned, overflowing with confidence. He said that by tomorrow, the entire continent would be laughing at the collapse of the great House of Swordsmen. With a wicked smile, he savored the thought of spreading rumors that the young lord had been reduced to cheap dog food. At that moment, the memory of the legendary hero Burkle returned to Klain's mind. He remembered the man's solemn words about fighting for the future of the children, and the irony was so absurd that Klain could not hold back a muffled laugh. Then, unable to contain himself, the former villain covered his face with one hand and burst into loud laughter that echoed through the silent forest. Dalton stared at him in confusion and irritably asked if Klain had lost his mind before his death. Klain wiped a tear from the corner of his eye and slowly regained his composure, leaving his next words hanging in the air with a threatening weight. Half his face sank into shadow, and his eyes burned a fierce red as he called Dalton a brat who had grown far too bold. The air changed instantly. An overwhelming pressure spread through the clearing, crushing Dalton's confidence in a single breath. Cold sweat formed on his face as his arrogant expression began to crumble. Staring at the human trash before him, Klain questioned how they dared to disgrace the lineage that had been built at the cost of his own end. Dark energy spiraled wildly around his small body. Dalton trembled and stammered in disbelief, asking how someone useless could use spells without mana. Klain warned him that this was not magic. Wrapped in terrifying shadows, the necromancer declared in a deep, chilling voice that this was pure demonic energy. The hired thugs panicked at the disturbing sight, wondering what kind of monster the boy truly was. Dalton's eyes widened as he finally understood the meaning behind Klain's words and realized the situation had become far worse than he could handle. With a frightening smile lit by eerie green flames, Klain summoned the ancient evil spirits buried in the depths of time. Drawing power from the core of his soul, he commanded the lost souls to rise once more and serve him under the authority of his true name. Obeying the absolute will of the reincarnated villain, dozens of cadaverous skulls emerged from the flames. Klain ordered them to devour everything. The dark entities multiplied across the forest floor, thirsty for blood and eager to annihilate every enemy around them. Dalton shook from head to toe, refusing to believe that the myth of the shadows was real. Then, as a macabre army of skeletons rose behind Klain, he screamed the name of the legendary necromancer in terror. Stretching his hand forward with a devilish expression, Klain ordered his creatures to destroy every enemy in the clearing. As the slaughter began, the former Dark Lord reflected in the darkness that he had thought he had forgotten this violent feeling. Yet as screams of terror mixed with the clattering of bones, the old aura of the mortal villain returned with full force beneath the night sky. Alone in the darkness, Klain thought that 200 years had passed like an endless stretch of time. But deep inside that void, he could still feel the same energy echoing without pause. The voices of the dead called to him from the shadows, and the necromancer accepted their call with pleasure. That familiar resonance brought back deep memories from his previous life. Covering his blood-stained face, Klain savored the wonderful nostalgia of it all. Dalton, drenched in cold sweat, still refused to believe what he was seeing. One of the mercenaries screamed the famous Dark Lord's name after witnessing the cadaverous army rise from the ground. Klain cruelly confirmed that this was exactly what people used to call him in the past. The thugs froze in horror, realizing that the rumors about his possession had never been mere legends. They stared at the summoned creatures and noticed that their bones were completely black, while a red aura burned from their eyes. One of the skeletons murmured the order to kill. Dalton stood in silence, unable to process the overwhelming disadvantage before him. Trying to break the tension, one mercenary laughed nervously and said that the creatures were nothing more than useless bones. Klain lowered his gaze, his face darkening at the insult directed toward his army. Dalton forced himself to regain confidence, claiming that he had crushed hundreds of skeletons during missions before, though he questioned why these ones were black. Ignoring every warning his instincts gave him, he announced that they would take one of those bones home as a souvenir. Then he ordered his men to deal with the monsters blocking their path first. The archers pulled their strings with force, aiming straight at the undead horde. The ambush leader ordered the long-range unit to prepare a lightning-fast attack. The mercenaries loaded their heavy combat crossbows as quickly as possible. Without hesitation, their commander shouted for them to open fire on the lone enemy. A massive rain of arrows tore through the forest air, flying straight toward Klain. The projectiles descended at terrifying speed, meant to finish the target in a single volley. Klain's eyes shone with intense energy as he watched the attack come. The arrows slammed into the muddy ground around him, yet not a single one reached anything important. Dalton laughed loudly, believing his cousin had been turned into a human pincushion, but his joy vanished almost immediately. A solid barrier had formed in front of Klain, stopping every projectile. The black skeletons had used their own bodies as shields, protecting their lord from the ambush. With a sadistic look, Klain concluded that 200 years was more than enough time for people to forget the true nature of his army. The shooters stared in disbelief at the monster's flawless defensive formation. Klain understood that they must have mistaken his servants for ordinary skeletons. With complete confidence, he made it clear that his summons were entirely different. Dalton stood frozen in fear as Klain told him to pay close attention. At once, Klain ordered the first unit to break formation and advance. The memory of Burkle's words resurfaced again. The hero had said that Klain had to die in order to protect the future of the North. Clenching his fists with fury, the necromancer swore that he would personally crush the filth mocking that sacrifice. The cadaverous monsters rushed forward at frightening speed, obeying their lord's merciless command. Dalton panicked as he saw them sprinting, asking when creatures like that had ever been able to run. A terrifying wave of undead flooded the forest, hungry for the blood of every enemy present. One mercenary tried to calm the others, telling them to hold their formation against the beasts. Before he could finish, a deep slash tore across his chest and blood burst from his mouth. The dark summons ripped through the human defensive line in a pitiless massacre. Dalton cursed in desperation as he watched his professional killers get cut down with ridiculous ease. With no other option, he ordered the second unit of crossbowmen to surround the skeletons and contain their advance. The mercenaries on the ground looked up, only to discover a new threat already waiting above them. Several skeletons were perched among the high branches, armed with ballista-like weapons and ready to fire. A mercenary screamed that the beasts had long-range weapons and ordered everyone to run. Klain's expression remained cold as he quietly commanded the skeletons to fire. Several deadly bolts ripped through the air at once, flying toward the fleeing men. The iron rain pierced the backs of those trying to escape the death trap. Agonized screams filled the clearing as the killers collapsed one after another onto the dark ground. The force of the impacts knocked down the remaining mercenaries, turning the forest floor into a blood-soaked battlefield. Watching the extermination, Dalton trembled in terror. He finally understood that these monsters were far too lethal. Fearing total annihilation, he ordered the survivors to drop their bows and fight directly. He shouted with all his strength, asking if those useless thugs were even listening to his commands. Then Dalton turned and saw a skeleton approaching from behind. Charging with his heavy sword, he cursed the damned creature and swore to finish it. Finding an opening, he swung cleanly and severed the monster's head in a single blow. Dalton laughed in triumph, celebrating that the head was still the weak point after all. But the headless skeleton remained standing with its weapon in hand. Dalton gasped in fear. He had been certain that decapitation would stop it. With cruel irony, Klain reminded his foolish relative that he had already warned him that his servants were different. The decapitated skeleton calmly bent down and picked up its own skull from the grass. On the ground, the skull's eyes glowed with intense red energy. Dalton stood paralyzed as the beast placed its head back onto its neck. Klain mentally explained that spirits summoned through demonic energy did not die from ordinary physical attacks. Fully restored, the monster unleashed a terrifying roar and prepared to continue the massacre. One thug retreated in horror as the reincarnated aberrations moved with complex combat tactics. The macabre army cornered the remaining mercenaries, proving exactly why Archimonde had once dominated the continent. Watching the spreading despair, Klain lamented that his current body could only sustain 11 units. Still standing with an intimidating calmness, he asked Dalton whether they should continue the hunt. While chaos ruled the mountain forest, the night remained dark and merciless. Far away, at the main mansion, the luxurious fountain glimmered peacefully beneath the moonlight while laughter echoed nearby. Priest Garrison burst into laughter while telling little Aaron that the young lord had done many absurd things at the monastery. He found the old memories hilarious, while Aaron listened with innocent curiosity. With a kind smile, Garrison commented that she seemed to like the young master very much. Chewing happily, Aaron confirmed without hesitation that she liked him a lot. Back in the dark forest, one of the mercenaries begged Klain to stop the massacre. Panting and trembling, the man asked if the young lord understood how incredible he truly was. Before he could say more, a skeleton pierced him with a fatal blow. At the same moment, Aaron's gentle voice seemed to echo in contrast, saying that her master was kind. Blood sprayed from the mercenary's body as he collapsed. The memory continued, with Aaron praising the cookies Klain gave her. In pure innocence, the maid stated with complete conviction that Klain was the warmest person in the whole world. In the forest, Klain's face was stained with enemy blood as he coldly extended his hand in the middle of the slaughter. Following his merciless command, the macabre summons tore apart the remaining mercenaries without pity. Fighting desperately for his life, Dalton blocked a heavy strike from one of the creatures with great difficulty. Cursing in rage, he swung his sword with all his strength and managed to push the monster back. But the black skeleton recovered immediately, proving that ordinary attacks meant nothing. Breathless and furious, Dalton swore that he would find a way to stop those bone pests from regenerating. Then his eyes landed on Klain, who stood calmly in the distance. Dalton realized that the boy himself was the key. While dodging the skeleton's relentless attacks, he concluded that if he killed the summoner, the undead would vanish. Seizing a gap, Dalton charged straight at Klain, raising his sword and screaming his name. Completely delusional, he shouted that this game with harmless corpses ended there. Bringing his blade down with all his strength, he declared that every undead creature would disappear once Klain died. At that exact instant, Klain's eye glowed with intense purple energy. Remaining perfectly calm, the young lord told himself that he could see every movement his enemy made. Using that enhanced vision, he drew his own sword, now wrapped completely in destructive dark aura. The memory of Dellen's earlier demonstration returned with perfect clarity, allowing Klain to reproduce the technique he had seen only once. Dalton's eyes widened in shock as he recognized the stance of the Ryland family's secret art being used against him. In a lightning-fast motion, Klain executed the meteor sword and released a colossal slash toward his target. The attack struck Dalton directly, leaving him confused and coughing blood. With a demonic expression, Klain warned that trash like him would not receive an easy death, because the real punishment had only just begun. Dalton lost the strength to stay upright and collapsed onto the ground, defeated. Klain then acknowledged that Dalton's theory had been correct. He explained that if the summoner died, the creatures would lose their power, and that very weakness was how Archimonde had once lost in the past. However, Klain found it deeply ironic that the feared lord who had once relied only on demonic energy had now received a second chance in this body. Gripping his sword firmly, he admitted that the power of the enemy family was precisely what had saved him now. The Ryland blood flowing through his veins had only made him stronger than before. Klain warned that since he had been born into this body, he could no longer pretend the problems of this noble house had nothing to do with him. Lying on the bloody grass and writhing in pain, Dalton desperately asked what those strange words meant. Ignoring the useless prey at his feet, the platinum-haired boy looked into the darkness and told Burkle to wait and see what he would do next. Looking at the ruined state of the lineage before him, Klain silently swears that he will rebuild this collapsing family with his own hands. Some time later, Dalton slowly regains consciousness with a groan of pain. When he opens his eyes, he finds himself in a strange place surrounded by complete darkness. He cannot see anything, and the suffocating emptiness leaves him confused and terrified. The moment he tries to move, cold metal bites into his wrists and arms, chains rattle around him, and he quickly realizes that his legs are also bound. He is strapped to a horrifying torture chair, with no way to escape. Then a red light flickers in the darkness. The flash reveals Klain. With a cold expression, he remarks that his annoying relative has finally awakened. Carrying the presence of Archimonde in his posture, Klain explains that this is the place where souls go after death. Dalton falls into shock. Trembling, he asks if this is the dreaded afterlife created by the Necromancer. Klain calmly confirms it. Then he recalls Dalton's sins, mentioning the dogs he tortured and the atrocities he disguised as hunting. Even while bound, Dalton explodes in rage and demands that Klain stop talking nonsense and untie him immediately. But then his memories return. He remembers the fight, the lightning-fast attack, and the blow that struck him directly. The certainty hits him all at once. He should have died. Confused, he looks down at his body and asks how he can still be whole after taking a fatal wound. Terror spreads across his face, and he starts sweating as he screams that it is impossible. Klain raises a magic flame in his hand and says with disturbing calm that it does not matter whether Dalton believes it or not. Around him, hellhounds appear, drooling with hunger as they growl at the prisoner. Klain declares that the only thing that matters is that the time has come for Dalton to pay for his sins. The beasts snarl, exposing their sharp fangs, and Dalton's face loses all color. The vengeful souls of the victims he tormented seem to manifest inside those monstrous dogs, turning his punishment into the reflection of his own cruelty. Dalton pulls against the chains with all his strength, but the chair does not move. Klain tells him to listen. Without mercy, the dogs attack. They begin devouring Dalton alive, tearing screams from the depths of his soul. He cries and begs for help while experiencing the exact suffering he inflicted on others for years. Tears of blood stream from his eyes, symbolizing the endless pain waiting for him in that dark underworld. Klain watches coldly and tells him that this hell was created by his own actions. Back in the real world, Klain stands silently in the middle of the forest, processing what he has just done. The black skeletons wait obediently behind him until he turns, sensing that one final thing remains. Cyan magical energy wraps around his body as he tells the undead that he will grant them their reward for helping him. Then he breaks the curse binding them to that corrupted state and releases their suffering souls. Small blue particles drift gently into the air. The entire forest glows with soft light as the army disappears into the night breeze. Watching the souls ascend toward the heavens, Klain reflects that true death is exactly this, bones scattering into the wind. Then his gaze falls on the pile of mercenary corpses lying in the mud, and he once again wonders why he was resurrected in the first place. Suddenly, a mysterious voice breaks the silence and congratulates him. Klain turns sharply, instantly taking a combat stance. With a cold glare, he realizes the intruder must have seen everything and demands to know who he is. Beneath a ragged hood, a sinister man smiles cynically while green magic gathers around him. He says that his name does not matter. Then he mocks Klain's intelligence, claiming that even if he explained, Klain would not understand. At that moment, one of the fallen mercenaries begins to glow with dark energy and moves again under the man's control. Its eyes take on a supernatural light, proving that another person on the mountain is manipulating the dead. With brutal force, the unknown necromancer raises zombies from the mud, beginning a new confrontation in the middle of the massacre. Klain realizes that the boy used resurrection arts to control the dead. Relieved, the thug assumes their target is merely a necromancer and says that the corpses scattered around them will still be useful. The killer's sadistic laughter echoes through the dark mountain. Meanwhile, back at the main mansion, Aaron excitedly calls Commander Dunkel over to hear funny stories about Klain's childhood. But Dunkel ignores her for the moment and says in a distant voice that he will listen later. Holding the signaling scroll, the bodyguard wonders why Klain used an artifact meant only for emergencies. 3 hours have already passed since the hunt began, and a terrible feeling settles over him. Unable to wait any longer, Dunkel decides to go after the young master, but a local guard blocks him. The man warns that abandoning his post now would cause trouble and suggests waiting until the event ends. Dunkel silently stares at him with a sharp gaze. Then he notices the crest on the guard's armor and recognizes it as belonging to the Cornwell family. He immediately understands that Dalton's personal guards were involved from the beginning. With that realization, Dunkel reaffirms his duty as protector of the main heir. Letting a threatening aura spread around him, he makes it clear that if they try to stop him again, he will not remain still. The guard swallows hard, unable to answer under the pressure. Aaron then asks worriedly if something happened. Dunkel tells her to listen carefully and orders her to return to the mansion with the priest first. Confused, Aaron says that the priest already disappeared without saying anything, wearing a very strange expression. Dunkel stiffens. He remembers Garrison complaining about a sinister aura earlier, and now his disappearance feels deeply suspicious. Realizing the danger, the commander curses and quickly mounts his horse. As he gallops down the road at full speed, he becomes certain that none of this is a coincidence. The wind strikes his face as he rides, convinced that Klain has fallen into a terrible trap. Back in the western forest, Klain pants, realizing that his demonic energy has been completely drained from the last clash. He can no longer use necromancy. His body feels heavy, and he bitterly admits that this fragile form cannot last long in battle. Seeing his exhaustion, the mercenary leader points forward and orders his men to advance. He shouts for them to eliminate the young master immediately before he can react. Preparing his own spell, the man mocks Klain for being foolish enough to fight them with the same dark arts. With a sinister snap, the moon crest on the Klain's hand begins to shine with intense power. In response to the spell, several armed zombies leap from the shadows, rushing to tear apart the main heir. Cornered, Klain's eyes widen while the enemy declares that he is finished. Then the mercenary's arrogant expression vanishes. A blinding flash tears through the night. A colossal pillar of golden light descends from the heavens and crashes into the battlefield. The divine impact obliterates the dark beasts charging at Klain. With his eyes blazing in holy fury, Priest Garrison appears in the chaos, calling for the light to grant peace to the dead. A massive explosion of purifying power sweeps across the clearing and erases the evil creatures as if they were nothing. The giant priest's silhouette towers in the smoke as he tells Klain that he can now rest easy. The mercenary leader trembles before that absurd power and stammers, asking what kind of monster has appeared. Garrison answers with an intimidating expression, ready to deliver divine judgment. He introduces himself as the Exarch of the Holy Order and warns that the real fight begins now. In the church hierarchy, that title belongs to only 3 human weapons who have sworn to carry out the Pope's absolute will. They are the Order's ultimate combat force, and the only ones capable of wielding the great holy armament left by the ancient saint. Their destructive power is so overwhelming that rumors claim each Exarch carries the might of an entire fortress. Blinded by the divine glow, the mercenary leader covers his face against the violent wind. More rays of light fall from the dark sky, crushing the remaining enemy summons without mercy. Gritting his teeth, the thug asks which of the 3 legends Garrison is. Klain observes the priest's stance and realizes he is standing before the Exarch known as the strongest in martial prowess. With absolute confidence, Garrison tells Klain again that he can relax because he has arrived. Before the conversation continues, one of the enemy's undead creatures steps forward, snarling at the priest. In a blink, Garrison charges straight at it with terrifying speed. The zombie barely manages to react before the priest's holy fist smashes into it. The blow tears off its head with ridiculous ease, scattering bone fragments everywhere. Then Garrison swings a crushing hook into an entire group and shouts for all the sinners present to listen. With his eye glowing with the Order's power, he tells the beast to seek forgiveness through prayer immediately. Uncontrolled and terrifying, Garrison grabs one enemy by the neck and slams him into the ground, promising to grant him a true baptism of fire. The survivors try to flee, but the priest catches up to them while declaring that he will wash away the sins of that useless trash. He plants his foot hard into the muddy earth, gathering power for another attack. A frantic series of divine punches destroys multiple targets at once as he declares that this is his mercy. The mercenary leader breaks into a cold sweat, wondering why an Exarch is in such an isolated place. Watching his troops be torn apart, he cannot believe the difference in power between them and that cleric. Realizing defeat is inevitable, he turns and runs, cursing that none of this was part of the original deal. As he flees, he complains that such brute strength makes no sense and is completely unfair. Before he can stand, Garrison's massive figure looms behind him and asks where he thinks he is going. Without pity, the priest grabs the man's head with one hand, making him scream in agony. With an empty expression, Garrison ignores the cries and warns that today's prayer is not over yet. Crushing the mercenary's skull little by little, he tells the sinner to be grateful for the wonderful judgment he has received. What is left of his equipment rolls to a stop, marking the end of the massacre. Klain watches in silence, swallowing hard when he hears Garrison's heavy voice call his name. The boy remembers the absurd scene he just witnessed. The giant old man destroyed an entire army by simply charging straight forward and punching everything in his path. For the first time since his reincarnation, the former villain feels genuinely intimidated by the sheer wind pressure of another person's attacks. Stunned, Klain processes the fact that more than 20 enemies were shredded in mere seconds. Garrison emerges from the thick darkness and extends a blood-covered hand toward the air. The battlefield is soaked in blood, yet the priest calmly says that he came running as soon as he sensed the necromancy aura. With an eerily serene face, Garrison says that this situation is very strange. Klain remains tense and unmoving while the Exarch examines the dark energy lingering in the area. After studying the scene, Garrison concludes that the sinister power he felt earlier does not seem to have come from the mercenary leader. Klain breaks into a nervous cold sweat and curses the fanatic in his mind. Gripping his injured arm, he understands that if he makes even one wrong move, he could be killed on the spot. Then, a distressed voice cuts through the tension. Commander Dunkel arrives on horseback, calling for the young heir and asking if he's all right. Surprised by his arrival, Klain only murmurs the commander's name. His face is bleeding, and he admits inwardly that using such heavy spells has taken a brutal toll on his body. Seeing Klain's terrible condition up close, Dunkel's eyes widen in horror. He leaps down from his horse and rushes across the dark ground. Klain's legs finally give out, and Dunkel catches him before he falls. In terror, the commander asks what caused this bloodbath. Confused by the scene, he immediately looks around for Dalton, but Klain turns his gaze away in silence. Under the faint moonlight, Klain coldly admits that he killed his cowardly relative. The next day, everything shifts to a large noble hall, where Klain explains that he only acted because Dalton tried to kill him first. A hand slams hard onto the table, sending a furious echo through the chamber. Count Delkin, head of the Cornwell family, rages and asks if that brat dares accuse the late Dalton of murder. Standing in the middle of the assembly, he mourns his loyal son and calls it absurd that anyone would try to frame him after his death. One of the nobles present interrupts, suggesting that everyone should focus on finding the real culprit behind the tragedy. However, a long-haired lord raises a document and points out that Klain's testimony has remained consistent after hours of interrogation. Staring at Delkin, he reveals that records prove 20 mercenaries sent by Delkin vanished on the same night. Sweat forms on Delkin's face as he curses his men internally for leaving evidence behind. From another side of the room, someone argues that the story still makes no sense, since the powerless boy supposedly never even held a sword. Others agree, remembering that Patriarch Heinkel himself confirmed Klain had no mana. Seeing the situation spiraling out of control, Delkin realizes he will be ruined if they uncover the ambush he planned. Trying to shift suspicion, he lowers his face and suggests they examine Klain's suspicious character instead. He brings up old rumors about the boy's mother and recalls how Klain had claimed to be a necromancer since birth. The long-haired noble warns Delkin to control his tongue before spreading such nonsense in an important meeting. But Delkin loses control and accuses Klain of hiring killers to place the blame on Dalton. Before he can continue, someone cuts him off with a sharp shout. Startled, Delkin turns in fear to see who interrupted him. Klain walks to the center of the hall and warns that he has heard enough lies and will no longer tolerate them. Calmly, he repeats that he only defended himself against an assassination attempt. He also reminds everyone that Priest Garrison witnessed the aftermath. Desperate, Delkin accuses him of lying shamelessly. Klain throws the question back at him in a challenging tone. With a wicked smile, he thinks to himself that if they want to believe wild rumors, then perhaps the story of him being the Dark Lord must also be true. As Delkin grinds his teeth in rage, Klain recalls the promise he made after executing Dalton. With a focused, dark gaze, he silently swears again that he will protect and rebuild this family, refusing to let parasites destroy it. Suddenly, loud knocks strike the giant doors of the hall, cutting through the tense meeting. The doors slowly open. A confident female voice apologizes for arriving late. Leia, the great commander of the Order of the Holy Spear, enters the hall with flawless posture and an imposing presence that instantly changes the atmosphere. Watching her from the corner of his eye, Klain finds her arrival strange. She had never appeared during his previous training, so he cannot understand why she would involve herself now. Some nobles whisper that the matter has nothing to do with her lineage, but Patriarch Heinkel calmly states that he personally permitted her entry. The long-haired noble explains that the late Dalton used to accept direct missions from Leia's cavalry. Because of that professional connection, she has the right to take part in the judgment. After the explanation, Leia scans the room with a sharp, intimidating gaze. Then she walks toward Klain and silently fixes her eyes on him. The young lord becomes confused when she asks for permission to speak with him privately. One noble questions the reason, but Heinkel allows it as long as the conversation is brief. He tells Klain to accompany the guest without delay, leaving the boy with a bead of sweat on his face. As they walk through the luxurious hallway, Klain internally grumbles that dealing with noble warriors is always annoying. Still, he quickly stops himself and realizes that this interference could become useful. He deduces that she either wants to confirm the facts, test him, or investigate the murder suspicion directly. Convinced that his father is also using this chance to assess him, Klain decides not to back down. With ambition stirring in his mind, the former villain swears that he will use Leia's connections to rise higher, then opens the side door. Leia enters the small meeting room with firm, elegant steps. In silence, she slowly turns toward Klain, who has just entered behind her. Then she takes a step closer. With a playful tone, she catches him completely off guard. Before Klain can react, she corners him against the door and asks in a seductive manner if she can touch him. Klain turns red with panic, wondering if this absurd situation is truly happening. Leia is not merely beautiful. She is the eldest daughter of a great house and the strongest spearmaster in the Empire. Official reports from recent extermination missions prove the terrifying brutality hidden behind her elegance. In battle, she spins her spear with effortless grace, releasing massive slashing blasts that tear through the field. With an intense glow in her focused eyes, she charges through monsters at incredible speed. The gigantic beasts barely manage to roar before her strikes crush them completely. Alone, the commander of the Holy Spear slaughters dozens of high-level creatures without leaving a single scratch on her armor. When the carnage ends, she lands gracefully on the ground, proving her absolute martial supremacy. Her overwhelming achievements against those monsters have already turned her strength into legend throughout the Empire. Back in the present, Klain nervously tries to pull away and asks what his cousin thinks she is doing. Leia ignores the complaint and keeps pressing closer, warning him not to pretend that there is any real closeness between them as family. At that, Klain remembers his father once saying that Leia was indeed a distant relative. However, his mind quickly pieces together that she does not share the same bloodline as his aunt. Leia's face grows slightly flushed as she whispers that from this point on, the conversation is driven only by personal curiosity. In a sudden movement, she throws the platinum-haired boy against the wall, making him cry out in surprise. Staring down at him like helpless prey, she repeats that she wants to touch him, leaving the necromancer's mind in complete disorder. Outside the room, Klain screams in frustration and demands to know where this madness suddenly came from. Leia firmly grabs his wrist and orders him to show her his hand. Examining his palm closely, she notices that his skin is smooth and soft, without the scars or calluses expected from sword training. Klain panics internally as she rubs his fingers and inspects them with unsettling focus. She states that tendons do not lie about whether someone has used weapons. Sliding her thumb over his hand in an invasive way, she makes it clear that his body does not carry the marks of a swordsman. Klain, still confused, asks where she is going with this. Leia directly asks whether he truly used a sword in the fight. She finds it suspicious that someone with no swordsmanship marks could defeat a knight and 20 killers. Then she throws out the bait, asking if the young master survived by relying on some other mysterious power. Taking the opening, Klain quickly shoves her away and breaks the suffocating tension in the room. Regaining his composure, he mocks her by asking if she's also going to repeat that nonsense about him being Archimonde. The former villain immediately understands that this woman is dangerous. She is not flirting for no reason. She is trying to force a careless reaction from him. Since silence would only look like a confession, Klain decides to be even bolder than her and treats the suspicion like a joke. Instead of being shaken, Leia bursts into laughter, repeating the Dark Lord's name as if it were ridiculous. Mocking his appearance, she says that it is impossible for such a short boy to be the reincarnation of such a terrifying monster. Klain freezes in the middle of the room. The insult strikes the old lord harder than expected. He becomes completely indignant at the unexpected attack on his height. Trembling with rage, he asks if she misspoke. Leia denies it and ironically asks if she needs to repeat herself. Then she destroys his self-esteem further, saying that he lacks the proportions, voice, and presence to be anything more than a little shrimp. Even though he knows she is wrong, the necromancer suffers terrible emotional damage from her sharp criticism. Leia casts a glance over her shoulder and declares that she will allow him to kiss her if he can actually defeat an official knight. Faced with that bizarre bet, Klain falls silent, unable to understand how the conversation took such an absurd turn. His mind short-circuits as he wonders why she would offer something like that as a reward after insulting him so viciously. He guesses it may be some kind of political bait while watching Leia walk calmly toward the door. Bathed in the late afternoon light from the window, the commander pauses briefly. Then, with unusual seriousness, she murmurs to herself that the true dark villain would never behave in such a restrained way. Soon, footsteps echo through the hallway as the two return to the hall to continue the official judgment. Back in the center of the room, Klain admits to himself that he was naive to think the nobles would simply believe him. Count Delkin maintains a haughty posture, knowing that the word of an exiled boy is worth almost nothing here. Curious about the delay, the long-haired noble politely asks what Klain and Leia discussed in private. Just as Leia takes a step to answer, Klain suddenly acts. In one explosive movement, he drives a sword into the marble floor with all his strength. The thunderous impact startles everyone in the hall. The nobles stare at him in shock, unable to understand his sudden boldness. Without looking away, Klain calls Count Delkin by name and declares that he will prove the truth with his own hands. Gripping the sword's hilt firmly, he tells the cowardly leader to stop delaying things so they can settle the matter once and for all. With a dark expression, Klain formally challenges his enemy to trial by combat. The insane suggestion throws the hall into chaos. The nobles question his sanity, because trial by combat is an ancient northern tradition with no restrictions on weapons or techniques. Only the winner decides the final verdict. Caught off guard by Klain's boldness, Delkin stammers, struggling to understand why he would propose such an extreme measure. Klain says that Delkin ignored the evidence of the ambush and even dared to insult his mother in front of everyone. However, deep down, the former villain admits he feels no emotional attachment to the woman who gave birth to this body. Pressed by the room's attention, Delkin tells the boy to calm down. Klain tells him to make his decision quickly instead. He asks whether the Count plans to make the entire nobility wait for his answer, leaving the branch leader cornered. Then Patriarch Heinkel steps forward and supports his son's proposal. He guarantees that the result of the duel will be honored by the entire lineage. Delkin quickly analyzes the situation. If he accepts the duel, all previous evidence against him could be wiped away depending on the outcome. Seeing that opening, he changes his posture and asks mockingly whether a magicless boy can handle such a burden. He makes it clear that he will send a knight to fight in his place. In his mind, he swears that this time he will kill the brat for good. Klain coldly warns that the opponent will be the only one to die, and through that death, everyone will understand exactly how Dalton was eliminated. Without hesitating any longer, Delkin accepts the formal challenge and declares that the bloodbath will take place in 4 days. Leia watches everything in silence. Klain, however, silently promises that he will use this duel to put those branch relatives back in their place. Night falls over the massive estate, carrying with it his dark vow to destroy and rebuild the family. Inside a room lit by an expensive chandelier, a desperate cry suddenly cuts through the quiet. Completely indignant, Delin asks if his younger brother has lost his mind for proposing trial by combat. Klain sits slumped in an armchair without the slightest concern. He sighs and says that he already understands the risks. Delin swallows hard, especially after hearing that even the Patriarch approved the madness. With no argument left to stop the event, he clenches his fists and offers to become Klain's representative in the duel. Klain rejects him immediately. With his arms crossed, Klain tells his older brother to focus on reality. He reminds him that the family's survival depends on keeping the main successor strong and untouched. The platinum-haired boy explains that putting Delin, the main heir, in the arena would be the same as handing victory to the cowardly Branch family on a silver platter. He understands Delin's frustration, but he makes it clear that he must face this ordeal alone to clear his own name. His decision does not waver. The former villain adds that he has no reason to give up such a valuable opportunity. The atmosphere grows heavier as Delin pours out his feelings. He remembers how happy he was when he first ran to meet the youngest child. In his memory, the newborn's tiny finger grabbed his hand, and Delin saw him as a little angel. That was the first time his heart filled with affection for the baby, forming a bond almost immediately. With a sad tone, Delin says that he waited 7 years to see Klain again, only to watch him walk straight toward death now. While Klain finds it strange that his brother is crying, just as Delin wipes his face, Dunkel's deep voice calls for the young master from the doorway. The commander apologizes for interrupting and says that Count Delkin has already chosen his champion for the decisive duel. Still dealing with his grumbling older brother, Klain turns his head slightly and casually asks who will be facing him. With a tense expression, Dunkel reveals that the opponent is Randall, an excommunicated warrior with a bloody reputation. Elsewhere, the double doors of a dark enclosure creak open as Dunkel's explanation continues. The figure of a roaring stuffed lion decorates the grotesque room where the next opponent waits for his prey. Thick red liquid, almost identical to fresh blood, is poured from a wooden bucket into an iron goblet. Sitting in a filthy room filled with weapons, the giant fighter suffers from a sick, uncontrollable craving for killing. Without the slightest trace of class, the muscular mercenary lifts the entire bucket and drinks from it at once. His scarred face twists with pleasure as he hears the news of the upcoming fight. Randall confesses that he has missed mutilating children. Far away in the safety of the mansion, the heir of shadows maintains a focused, deadly gaze as he quietly awaits the bloodbath.